All right, we made it to episode 3. This is really cool. And today we even have a special guest star. Can we have the guest star to introduce himself first?
Hi everyone, my name is Chang Long and I'm a senior tutor with the Department of Philosophy at NUS. And I just finished my PhD thesis in the Australian National University in ethics, and now I'm teaching PH 3230 normative ethical theory. So I've always been fascinated with ethics, probably for more than 10 years of my life now, and I hope that I can impart some of the fun of doing ethics with you guys.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Some of the students stay back after class to ask some of the questions. I was thinking to myself, I'm gonna twist one of the junior colleagues to come and help answer questions, man. And there's no better person because he's actually teaching the normative ethical theory module right now, in fact, right? So if you guys are interested in these topics, you know exactly who to look up next time. All right. So today we also have Gerald and Rachel as usual. So welcome back. So you guys want to tell us what the agenda is today?
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna be answering this very big question. Like, it's a very interesting question that came up like after the classes, after the lecture last week. So the question is, well, okay, maybe we have all these normative theories and moral theories, right? And maybe some of them are true or false, but the big question is, okay, why should we even be moral at all in the first place? Why should we do what is right?
Actually, Shang you must have heard this many times.
Yeah. And even at parties as well, people, when people find out I study ethics and moral philosophy, people are like, why should I care so much about ethics? I said to say, it's like a large proportion of them, some of them are lawyers. So I think that's maybe part of the pool. But I think there are good answers to the question, why be moral? Some of which refer back to your self-interest, actually your long-term self-interest. So I think some philosophers think that we don't fully appreciate the degree to which your long-term self-interest can converge with following moral rules in the immediate circumstance. But there's also a long other tradition, mainly due to like Immanuel Kant, who they think that you can derive certain requirements of rationality, if you will, that are like moral requirements, basically.
Hey, what you just said, that's kind of rings a bell for me, right? So it's almost as if there is one line of thinking, the rational self-interest stuff. So in a way that kind of connects with the well-being things, stuff that we've been talking about in our class, right? But you are saying that from Kant onwards especially, there is a different way of thinking about it. That's right. That's actually very curious, and I'm not sure that students will be as familiar with that. Actually, I'm curious, Gerald and Rachel, any quick thoughts about that?
So in my education, I didn't study a lot of moral philosophy after Kant. My moral philosophy, a lot of it came from historical studies of Plato and also of Buddhism. And I think Plato and Buddhism give two very different views. So Plato is really a proponent of like the fact that a good life is a moral life. Morality is deeply intertwined with well-being. And so that's I think Croft can correct me if I'm wrong, a central thesis in Plato's Republic. And for the Buddhists, on the other hand, I find it really interesting because their motivation of why be moral is somewhat that when you see reality for how it truly is, and so you see that there's no self, then it only makes sense to be compassionate, to be altruistic, etc. Because and so their motivation for why be moral is that it's the rational thing to do when you see reality for what it truly is.
How would you explain the so-called more modern answer, actually, Shalom? I think you're in a much better position than I am.
So the Kantian answer, you mean?
Yeah.
I think, okay, so I try to give you the SparkNotes version of it without all the kind of apparatus, right? So you just think about what you do as a human being when you are choosing between different things. I'm choosing between nasi lemak and chicken rice, right? I can step back from my different desires for different things, right? And I kind of appraise these desires and say, okay, this is the one that I want to go for at the end of the day. I'm not like other animals, let's say, where they act mainly on impulse and they just follow the strongest impulse. Whereas human beings, we have this ability to step back from our goals and think about, well, which is the most worthwhile goal to pursue, right? And what Kant makes of this observation is this, right? That if I went with one goal, let's say if I went with nasi lemak, right, I would be kind of committed to seeing that nasi lemak is valuable. But if I went with the other thing, right, went with chicken rice, I would see chicken rice is valuable. And what he derives from this is, well, the goodness of the nasi lemak, right, is not in the nasi lemak itself or in the chicken rice itself. Rather, the goodness is in my choosing this or that object. Okay, so what he says is something like, the goodness doesn't quite lie in the objects themselves. It lies in the rational capacity that chose these objects or that took these objects as valuable. And the idea that comes out from that is something like you're committed to recognizing or respecting the value of a certain kind of rational agency. And Therefore, you are also committed to recognizing this rational agency in other people. That's the SparkNotes version, I guess.
On this way of thinking about it, right, there is an element of a preference satisfaction theorist for well-being in Kant, actually, isn't it? Right?
There is, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that means that Kant is not even the so-called rationality answer for why be moral. It's not completely detached from the well-being business.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very clear way of thinking that kind of puts the value in the agent in some way, or like, the agent's choosing a certain thing confers it a certain kind of value that isn't kind of inherent in the thing itself.
But it's not just your occurrence desires or choice, right?
No,
it's
not at
sort
all.
of like the rational choice given, a certain idealized version of you and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so on Kant's picture, there's a very strong notion of the will as opposed to your desires, and the will is something that is kind of your own. You are the author of your will, if you will, and that will is able to step back from any of the desires and kind of make a certain kind of decision. You are committed to the value of your agency or of your humanity, and by extension, you're also committed to the value of other people's humanity. And morality involves respecting the humanity of other people.
So can we push this question? Like, why do we bother to respect other people's agency?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question, right? So some people have pointed out what you have done, right, is you've derived the value for me, so the value of my agency for me, but you haven't derived the value of other people's agency for me. So you've only derived, so that's a big question and a big problem, I think, for these kind of fundamental approaches to morality. But I think the answer on the part of the Kantian would be something like you're committed to a kind of practical inconsistency. So it's not quite logical inconsistency, it's a practical inconsistency. You're like making an exception for yourself. Like only my agency is valuable, even though there's so many other agents that are relevantly like me, but I don't recognize their value. I only recognize my values.
So if I were to probe this a little bit deeper, I guess the natural question again will be something like, okay, so one way to think about what you're saying is that when I recognize the value of my own agency, that value is in a sense an impersonal one. If I recognize the value of my agency, I am presupposing recognizing the same value because it's a kind of an impersonal value in your agency, in your agency, in your agency as well, right?
Yeah.
So that's one line of thing. I don't think that's Kant though, right? I don't actually think that.
Yeah, I would hesitate to call it impersonal, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think he thinks of it in that direction.
Yeah.
And the reason why a parent problem comes out is precisely because he doesn't think of it that way. It is not impersonal. It is something about you and your subjective agency, right? And that's why people can ask the question, so how are we supposed to, so to speak, recognize that other people's agency also have value, since the value is tied to your subjective choice in the first place, right?
So I know some Kantians, they think that communication plays a big role. So like the fact that other agents are able to issue demands to us and that they're able to communicate with us, that reveals something about these other agents that I cannot escape from recognizing.
So it's a little bit like, I realize that at a certain fundamental level, they are like me, right? Is it a recognition like that or something like that?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. So that's kind of one. There are also other approaches that start with the sort of like badness for me or goodness for me, and then try to generalize it to other people. So like you think about, so you guys were talking about theories of well-being, and hedonism is one big theory, right? And some hedonists try to defend the self-evident badness of pain, right? I can see for myself that pain is bad for me. And they try to then generalize that to say, well, pain is going to be bad for other relevantly similar creatures like me as well. And that has very strong implications, as you might.
So it will be a version of the so-called silver rule, right? Don't do unto others what you don't want them to do unto you, because you totally recognize when they do it to you, it was painful for you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes, so it's not just that I don't like it, but I take them to have some kind of requirement that constrains them against, I take them to be blameworthy for doing that to me. It's not just that I don't like it. So there's a sense in which it's not just like, it's just detracting from my self-interest, let's say. Something more than that. We recognize some impartial requirements not to do so.
So, Richard, Gerald, do you all feel like you're satisfied?
I have questions on two fronts. The first one is kind of what Prof. Loy has been talking about, which is why should I value someone else's agency or pleasure over my own? Xiang, you said that there is some sort of requirement other than self-interest, and I'm still not quite clear on that.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that I guess in the rationality part, we recognize rationality in other human beings, but what about like non-humans? What about animal ethics? How would a Kantian like make sense of animal ethics?
Yeah, so I take the second question first. It's a tough question, and actually, I think so. Kant himself thought that the reason why we should respect animals in some way is because not respecting animals will lead us to not respect other rational beings in the end. So it's a kind of weird derivative way of recognizing the value of animals, if you will. At the end of the day, he thinks that, yeah, it's because of the effect on our treating other rational beings, not our treating animals specifically, which you might think, well, now, in modern days, like, that's not quite satisfying. There are other Kantians who try to extend his line of thought in a different way. So Christine Korsgaard specifically has a lot of interesting arguments.
So I don't want to kind of misrepresent her arguments, but I think it goes something like this. From an animal's point of view, there are things that are good and bad for them. And we as humans share this animal nature as well. And so we also are committed to valuing these animals in this way, to seeing that there are things that are good and bad for them.
Yeah, so the self-interest point, I mean, it's very hard to, so these foundational questions, right? At some point you just ask why, and then, at some point you're going to say, that's just how it is, right? And I think a lot of moral philosophers will just say, when you look at any moral requirement, that we have in society today, it's quite clear that what goes into determining that requirement is not just my own well-being, or at least some of them will insist that, right? And someone else's well-being matters as well, and that does seem to be part of the modern concept of morality. But there are other philosophers who, just as I said, kind of try to say that it is actually in your long-term self-interest to obey the requirements of morality.
Which will of course be the older attempt to resolve this issue, going all the way back to people like Plato and Aristotle and all that.
And actually Hobbes as well, but Hobbes is in a different way, but yeah.
I mean, the simplest way to understand that would be something like, look, okay, suppose we take for granted that you do want to pursue your well-being. So if we can show you that other people's interests or the interests of the entire group of people, like a society, for instance, are constitutively part of your own well-being, then the gap narrows immediately. So we have interest not just in our own, so to speak, our own interest, right? We actually want other people to flourish, and that's part of how we get to flourish. Now, if that is true, the issue becomes much less difficult to resolve. But whether it was true, of course, was exactly the matter of contention, right?
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So when people like Thrasymachus and Callicles in Platonic dialogues bring out this issue, a way to sort of frame what they're asking is essentially, look, why are we so confident that our own self-interest, our own well-being, so to speak, includes other people's well-being, right? Why can't we imagine someone who is very strong, very smart, and who can get away with murder, so to speak? Are we so confident that he would have any reason, so to speak, to worry about the rest of us? The reason why we do worry about the rest of us is not because we really include their well-being in our well-being, it's rather because we can't enjoy the good things of life without people around us supplying us goods and services. So we are kind of like instrumentally required to help them so that they will help us, right? But of course, people are hoping for something more than that.
But so I will say there's a great passage in Hobbes where he says something like, even the strongest man, right, has to go to sleep one day. And, in that circumstance, that's where you're vulnerable. I mean, we're imagining a very special kind of being here when you're talking about someone who is basically invulnerable to any kind of threat at all. I don't think that being exists in our society, at least. So at least for all us humans, maybe, or all us humans in modern society, we're not that person.
So that's the reason why in Plato's Republic, Rizal will be very familiar with this passage, right? So the ring of Gyges. Right?
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say exactly that.
Right,
But maybe we should explain the ring of Gyges, right?
Yeah. So imagine that there is such a thing as a ring of invisibility. Imagine that you have two of these rings and there are two people. One is supposed to be a moral person and one is supposed to be the immoral person. And you give one ring to each of them. And according to the terms of this thought experiment, according to the proponent of this thought experiment, Glaucon, the half-brother of Plato, basically the two of them are going to do the same thing. They're both going to end up doing pretty bad things. The lesson that Glaucon wanted to prove on this is that if you act morally, it's only because of the instrumental reason that you don't have such things as ring of Gyges, right? You can't get away with murder, or as Shang Lu say, you still have to sleep, right? So he wants to make the bold proposal. And by the way, he supposedly said that I don't really believe this, but Socrates, please help me, right? That's the way he presents it, right? But it seems as if when we listen to people like Thrasymachus, only reason why we want to be moral is purely for instrumental reasons, because we can't get away with murder, because we are not strong enough. But if there should be someone among us who is strong enough, what reason would he have right? To obey these conventions. And Plato's attempt in the rest of the Republic is to show that when you think hard about it, when you think long and hard enough, especially after the long conversation that lasted the rest of the Republic, a friend of mine once calculated that the thing must have taken like many hours, and they still haven't eaten dinner by the end. By the way, in case those of you who go and watch the setup, is that if you really understood what is good for yourself, you realize that no, you wouldn't use the ring that way. But is it a very satisfying answer? I don't know. I mean, if you have the ring of Gyges, what would you do? I always ask my students that. Right? What is it that you really care about, that you really think, we don't even need to talk about objective well-being. We can even do it subjective, right? What is it you really want that really matters to you? And to go back to some of the things that were said earlier, I suspect that a lot of people will, if they are honest to themselves, they actually do want friends and loved ones, and they want things that are not just about themselves. Okay, that probably covers a big chunk of the population, but I don't think that convinces everyone. Yeah, now you can see why the so-called post-Kantian answer has a certain motivation behind it, right? They are hoping to short-circuit this entire way of thinking and saying that, no, this is not good enough. Yeah, we have reason to be moral that is not just about your self-interest, no matter how expensive your self-interest is. But I don't know, is it very successful? That is a question that I don't think I fully answer. I'm more old-fashioned in this. I'm actually more with Plato, Aristotle on these kinds of questions myself. I'll just say that first.
Can I just ask, so with the instrumental reasons, right, does it also include like avoiding feeling guilt and shame at having done certain things? So I guess, I feel like a large part of the self-interest justification, if you will, is that it's not just that other people will punish you or you might get caught or whatever else. You also feel really bad about it, and you have a kind of so at least maybe I'm just reporting my subjective mental state here, but it does seem like it's not that fulfilling a life, and you might live the rest of your life with blame and shame, and that might not be a great way to live as well, especially when you're surrounded by other people who endorse these moral rules and will criticize other people who break those moral rules. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that's why the rest of Book 2 of the Republic, Adeimantus came in to say that now you know why they tell us these stories when we grow up, to make sure that we have these kinds of thoughts in our heads, right? So the two brothers, Plato's two half-brothers, they were very smart about it. So one of them offered the ring of Gyges, the other one basically kind of planted this seed of doubt in us that all these feelings of guilt that we have, actually, it's the stories that tell us when we grow up. That's the reason why we feel those things, right? A strong man will overcome all this. Now, I don't think that it's possible to overcome this, but that's a different story, right? Yeah, Rachel, please.
I'm reminded with Shangwang's point on like the shame and stuff, right? Of Plato's, like Plato has a 3-level understanding of like what he calls the soul, but like you can understand it as also like the human psyche. So he has 3 things, right? The first thing is logos, which is rationality. Second thing is thumos, which is the place where all your feelings of shame come from. I'm not sure how it's translated.
Spirited, and then the spirited element, yeah.
Right, the spirited element, and then the last thing is I think it's called epithumia. And it's where like you can think of like your banal desires, so your sexual desires, your desire to eat, your desire to drink come from. And Plato's idea is that like a good life is when all these things are in balance. And his thesis is that these things can only be in balance if logos is on top, if your rationality is on top and controlling. If if epithumia is on top, your desires are on top, then like things will go out of balance, and then you feel a disproportionate amount of shame, maybe as Shangwang mentioned. I don't know if that is also Prof's interpretation.
Yeah, it is. I don't think I'm disagreeing with Plato as much as I think that he's not being completely honest with us in terms of advertising. Because when the whole thing is all in harmony, the picture that comes out is a philosopher. It's not an ordinarily moral person.
Yeah.
Okay. And then all you had done is just raise the question to another level, which is, are we very sure that the philosophers are very moral people?
Yeah, there are some studies actually of like philosophers. So apparently ethicists are like less likely to return their books on time. I don't even know. Yeah, so there are actually some studies. But on the other hand, so I had a friend who actually did a study with Peter Singer and some other person where they had this like randomized trial where they they write different vignettes of about like sort of donation stuff, and then they give it to people and they see how much people donate after they've read these vignettes. And there are some which are actually convincing in the sense that some people donated more after reading certain vignettes.
So would I be right to like just kind of repeating your point in my own words, right, Xianglong? It's saying something like this whole process of reflection, constant reflection, can somehow instill moral instincts in humans. Like, so for instance, if I learn a lot about moral philosophy, then I'm more likely to be struck by certain duties.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the kind of moral philosophy that you study. But yeah, I think sometimes, no, I think some for some people, they really do take it seriously. I will say it probably has to come together with like a desire to be a moral person. And there are, probably moral philosophers who don't have this desire to be moral people. And in that case, it's probably not so easy to. But yeah, there are some people who take seriously the problem of suffering, for example, or they just the badness of suffering, and try to see what more we can do to alleviate the suffering.
Yeah, so like maybe you can go back to like the main question, right? Which is like, why be moral? Also, to the person who's already moral, that seems like a very like kind of ludicrous question, because like, yeah, I just listen to moral reason. But I think the main reason why people want to ask the question in the first place is because of those immoral people, right? The people who are like the serial killers and like the psychopaths who like go around killing people like with no remorse, right? So like maybe it stems from like a desire to convince those people like that they should be doing the right thing. So of course, like us, like as moral people in society, right, we already know that we should do the right thing, and then we're already motivated to do it, but we also want to make sure that these immoral people also listen to us, right, when we give certain moral reasons. In that way, then the question isn't fully sort of satisfied.
So this will be sort of like thinking of an answer to the question of why be moral as if directed at the immoral person, right? The gold standard on this conception will be an argument that, in a sense, does not appeal to already assumed moral premises. They are shared by people who are not like. So that's one way to think about it. But of course, there are others who reject the entire basis of this way of thinking about the question at all, and saying that no. There was one guy who was asked a question like this, apparently in his PhD exam. I think Bertrand Russell was the examiner. So basically saying that, does your argument convince Hitler? And the guy was basically saying that, I don't think you prescribe moral philosophy to lunatics, So, and I think he's got a point. Yeah, any thoughts about this, Xianglong? So does ethics have ambition to try to give reasons even to someone who is not already minimally committed?
That's a tough one. So certainly as an ethicist, I take myself to be addressing the egoist as well. And, some of the early arguments about from self-interest are meant to try to convince the egoist that really you've gotten things a bit wrong here. You've basically gotten things wrong about how certain actions will or will not affect you and other people, and then affect you as well. Yeah, so I do take it as part of my goal to convince the egoist. But I agree with Gerald's point that, a strongman, thoroughgoing egoist, that's going to be a really tough challenge.
Even the so-called self-interest route, right? The whole point is to convince the person that he's not really the kind of egoist that he thinks he is. So in a sense, you're not really it's not that you're convincing him not to be an egoist, but the point is to put him in a favorable epistemic environment for him to realize that actually I'm not really an egoist. I do care about
and like in the specific instances, really you shouldn't be choosing what's in your like short-term self-interest, but in your long-term self-interest, maybe your long-term self-interest is still fulfilled by doing the moral thing in some specific occasions. But
that's right.
It's a tough one. As I said before, like when you ask why do this and then why do this, and then if you keep going back, right, there's going to be some stopping point at the end. And even with self-interest, let's just take the rule that when you desire an end, you should desire the means to that end, right? If someone asks you, well, why should I follow this rule? Why does self-interest dictate this rule? There's nothing much more you can say to them other than that's just how prudential rationality or instrumental rationality works. There's not much more you can say. So I think there is going to be some stopping point and some limit to the kind of argument that we can.
Are you familiar with Jean Hampton?
Yeah.
Jean actually, I remember one of the books that she wrote before she passed away was actually about exactly that issue. And she wants to claim that even the so-called hypothetical, imperatives, they are not as hypothetical as you think.
Exactly. Yeah. So we all have sort of self-interested reasons to follow that, we all have to follow that rule, regardless of what we desire.
So there's a sense in which the thing that connects if I want this, then I should do that. The thing that connects them, in fact, is not hypothetical at all.
It's not up to you. If you want to do well, it's not up to you to disregard the means when you want the end.
So maybe this is another way of noticing what Kant must have noticed in terms of there are certain things that are just in the very structure of our practical rationality, such that even if you just begin with your own self-interest, if you just take the thinking about that seriously and what it means for you to pursue it, you already recognize a lot of things already. Yeah, whether it succeeds in drawing the rest of morality out of that, of course, that's a different
It's a
question.
tougher one, yeah. Very ambitious project, and I think, very interesting project, but it's unclear whether it succeeds or not. Yeah.
So how can moral philosophy do this for us? What should we expect from moral philosophy?
It's a difficult question. Moral philosophers tell us all these theories. You also have to combine it with like empirical evidence about what leads to what as well in order to get a full recommendation. Like let's say we take hedonism to be true, that an individual's life is going well if like it's full of pleasure and doesn't have pain. We still have to decide what is the thing that leads to pleasure and pain in order to get concrete recommendations.
Yeah, but I think Gerald, you were pointing this out to us earlier, before the session. Students sometimes in the tutorials are saying that, why are we studying this? If it's really to find out what the definition of, say, right or wrong, or for the matter of definition of good and bad is, but it doesn't give us a way to sort of either come to know whether a particular action is right or wrong, or for the matter whether or not we can pursue this or how to pursue it. There seems to be a kind of a disconnect, right? People do seem to expect that moral theory is supposed to help us live our lives, but when we start doing it carefully, we realize that, it's really much more abstract and much more complicated than it seems at first sight. Has any of your students asked you that kind of question? Because you're teaching the more advanced class, maybe they start asking it already.
Not really. I mean, so we did do some applied topics, and you guys are doing applied topics soon. So I think those do show a little bit of the value of moral philosophy. But I will say the theory stuff is not immediately applicable to your everyday circumstance. Yeah. I will say it gives you a better understanding of the reasons behind certain moral rules. Let's say if you were interested to think about it.
So my go-to answer is, and that's why we had the applied ethics topics after the first 2 weeks. That's actually right, and it's not facetious actually. I don't think we appreciate the applied ethics topics in the same way if you don't have a little bit of sort of dabble in that kind of theoretical structures to gain that kind of subtlety, that kind of nuance. I don't think the pure theory topics are straightforwardly useful in helping us live our lives. I think that's a very strange way to think about it, because they're way too far, they're way too abstract. The applied ethics topics are very, very immediately, it's really where the rubber hits the road. Is it okay for us to eat factory farm meats, right? Is it okay to keep the bulk of our incomes when there are people who are suffering in the world and so on and so forth? The actual sort of hard answers that people are arguing about. So my answer has always been that the purely kind of consequentialism versus deontology, that kind of stuff, no, not really. But I don't think you will appreciate the factory farm animals topic or the Peter Singer topic as subtly if you don't have that background.
Yeah,
is this going to be happy enough for them? I don't know. It sounds like an instrumental reason. Gerald, I don't know, will your students be happy enough? And Rachel, your students happy enough? I don't know actually.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, you're right. Soon we're going to do Norcross. Next coming Friday is Norcross.
Nice.
Next week is
nice.
Peter Singer. Yeah.
So is Peter Singer Feminine Influence Morality?
Yeah, of course.
Nice. The
classic.
Man, very good. Yeah.
Classic. Every year I debate in my own heart. It's like, isn't it time for us to switch some of these out?
I think especially Peter Singer, it's he himself gives this lecture like all the time. So I saw actually him giving this lecture about I'm not going to spoil too much, but the drowning child, and he had this great joke in there where he said something like, it's actually very hard to find a picture of a drowning child on the internet to put on my slides. Yeah, but he still gives the same. He still gives the same lecture, and I think it does still have an impact on people, and I think it's definitely worth looking at it.
It's a modern classic.
It is.
Yeah. So that would be my answer. I don't personally believe that deontology and consequentialism and knowing that kind of stuff really, really well will help you live your life. I think that's a very strange way to think about it. But it's the same as saying that knowing theoretical physics probably will not help you build a bridge, right? These are different layers of engagement.
But it is still true that some developments in theoretical physics does impact engineering. It's
Correct.
just that it's in a much more indirect way, and there's got to be much more like people doing the bridge principles between the two of them, and you have to. So there's a lot more application going on. But that's definitely right.
Yeah, that's right. So if you want to bridge stuff, you could. I think you should go to the applied. But then all the engineers, they better know their physics, man, because otherwise I'm very scared.
I will say it goes the other way as well. So sometimes people look at certain applied ethics topics and they realize that it throws up certain interesting theoretical issues that are not fully appreciated on the theoretical side. So like just to give you one example, adaptive preferences is one. I don't know if you guys read it in the reading, but so some people, when they are faced with, let's say, a very horrible situation, they adapt their desires to that situation. So they come to want to just stay in this like unjust situation. Maybe it's very, racist or sexist situation. They adjust so that they think, oh, I desire to be in this situation now. And this is kind of like a theoretical problem for desire satisfaction theories, because if you take the actual desire as the standard, then it's like, well, everything's perfectly fine, right? But if you want to say there's something unjust or their life is not going as well as possible, then you might think, well, we can't just go with the actual desire satisfaction. Yeah, and it's a separate problem from the kind of misinformation problems. It's slightly different.
And just curious, how is it different? Like
the way misinformation tends to be put, right? Is
we
more
call
like
it in our class we call it false beliefs. So just in case any students.
All right, false beliefs. Yeah, so the false belief stuff is more like they have some like inaccurate views of the world. They they falsely believe that eating nasi lemak will bring them the most enjoyment or whatever, right? In the adaptive preferences case, it might be that they have true beliefs about how they were mistreated and so on, right? It's just that they've come to appreciate the small mercies, as one author puts it. They've come to just sort of adjust their expectations so that this is exactly the thing that they want. So it might be that they have completely accurate beliefs about the situation, and it's just that their beliefs have changed so that it makes them happy, or it fits their situation more. Yeah.
This is actually from our quiz, so Xianglong wouldn't know, right? It's as if instead of Xiaoyu wanting to go and buy the bubble tea, mistakenly believing that the shop is open, it's like, the one who realized that the shop would never open again, and then she convinced herself that, I never wanted this tea. No, tea, who cares about tea, right? So yeah, that adaptive preference. This is actually a serious problem, actually.
Yeah, looking at sort of certain communities where, certain people have been brought up in a certain way to think that this is the normal thing to do, or this is the thing to expect. In a sense, it's an indication of how, the sort of applied stuff can also influence the theoretical.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, I think that we have taken up a lot of your time, and I think you're supposed to take a delivery or something.
No worries, man. Happy to talk about ethics all the time. So
hey, really good to see you here, right?
Nice to see you guys. Thank you very much.
We still have 2 weeks to apply ethics, so we can still
I have to do my own mod as well. I'll try my best.
But wonderful. We have Yeo Xianglong, soon to be Dr. Yeo Xianglong. So if any of you are listening to this and thinking of doing more ethics, more moral theory, you know who to look out for next time. Okay.
See you guys.
Good to see you guys. Good to see Gerald and Risha as well. And I hope that you guys enjoy listening to this.
Yeah.
All the best.
All right.
Thanks for coming.
See you guys.